Good afternoon and welcome to the ACC Enrichment session for paper advanced audit and assurance. I hope all of you are doing well. Now, this enrichment session is all about preparing you for your upcoming March exam session. And if this is your first time joining the enrichment session, welcome on board. My name is Joanne, the Manager Learning Support for ACCA Malaysia. It is a privilege to have Ben Wilson with us this afternoon, and it's very early in the morning for him there though. Okay, Ben is our ACCA tutor guru, and he will be sharing more of himself and his expertise of this paper with you all in a short while. Yeah. Now, before I hand over the session to Ben, just let me run through quickly with you on the housekeeping item. Yeah. We will be using the chat box to communicate with everyone. If you have any questions to clarify with Ben while he is presenting, just feel free to type them in the chat box and select send to everyone. Yeah? Ben will address your questions whenever possible. Otherwise, you can save up your questions and ask them towards the end during the Q&A session. All right. So let's not delay the session any further. Now I shall hand over the floor to Ben. All yours.
Thanks, Joanne. Welcome, everybody. Your screen's going to change slightly now because I'm going to share my presentation with you for today. Give me a second. So you should now be able to see my slides. So welcome to this exam enrichment session for the March 22 exam sitting. My name is Ben Wilson, and I'm going to be with you for the next couple of hours, hopefully giving you lots of helpful advice to give you the best possible chance of passing AAA at this coming exam sitting. As Joanne mentioned in the introduction there, please use the chat panel as we go through the session. It's going to be participative, which means I'm going to be asking you things, and I'd really like you to give me things back in the chat panel. So I'm going to be asking you some questions. There is a formal Q&A session at the end. So if you have bigger questions, then please save those for the end. But if there's any questions you have on any of the slides as I'm going through them, please put them in the chat panel and I'll respond to those questions as we go. So my background and why ACCA Malaysia are working with me on this session. So I started my career as an auditor working at KPMG in London. So I've got 4 or 5 years of practical auditing experience. And I worked on a real range of clients, some very small businesses and some much bigger ones as well. So I used to work on the audit of Cathay Pacific, which was one of my bigger audits, because it's owned by a UK-based group. And I used to work on the BBC audit. Used to spend a good couple of months of the year working on the BBC. So I've got a real range of experience of being an auditor, of what it's like to do in practice. I've been teaching accounting for the last 15 years or so, and one of my roles now is that I'm an examiner with the ICAW, and that's for the auditing paper. So I've got lots of experience of writing exam papers and grading them. And so I'll be bringing some of that experience to you today, trying to kind of give you insights into what the examiner is really looking for when they're writing exam questions. And the more that you can understand what they're trying to do, the better that you are able to write answers that are designed to score marks. I now work with an organization called FME Learn Online, and we provide personalized tuition services to small groups of students. And I've been working with the ACCA for the last couple of years as their expert tutor for auditing and financial management papers. So if you've used any of the ACCA's free resources that they provide on the website, it's likely to have been me delivering those. So I may well be familiar to you already. I also, I know I have lots of listeners in Malaysia. About 40% of my listeners are actually in Malaysia. It's my biggest market outside of the UK. My podcast, which is designed to bring audit to life. So I take real world issues and then talk about them from an auditing perspective. And the idea is to try to give you more insight and more understanding of auditing as a subject matter. And it's really helpful for these long scenario-based questions that we see in AAA. So if you haven't listened to my podcast already, it's a really good free resource. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can find it on any major podcast platform. Just search for ACCA Ben Wilson and you'll find me. So today's agenda, what we're going to be doing. We're going to start with a brief overview of the exam requirements. Now, at this stage of your revision, I know you'll already hopefully have been practicing plenty of exam questions, so you'll already be familiar with this, but I'm going to give you a few insights as well into what the examiner is trying to do in each of these questions. We're then going to look at some of the common problems that students have with AAA, and I'm going to give you my advice on how to overcome those problems. Then some study skills, specific techniques that you can use, particularly around planning an answer and then turning that planned answer into a full written answer. And that section is going to be quite interactive. So I'm going to be asking you to do some tasks during this session. So be prepared for that. That's coming up. You may well want to grab a pen and a piece of paper so that you can write some answers to these tasks. Or even better, perhaps have yourself a Microsoft Word document set up so that you can type some answers. Then my top tips on how to pass this really difficult paper. And it's the pass rate is, let's be honest, the pass rate for AAA is really low. It's often one of the lowest at the strategic professional level. Last sitting in December 21, it was 34%. Sitting before 32%. It's really challenging. And you know that these aren't people that are sitting their first ACA exam. To get to AAA, you have to have passed many ACCA exams already. So the people getting here know what they're doing, and still only 32% of them pass, 34% of them pass. So I'm going to be giving you some advice on how you can best maximize your chances of being in that 34% rather than in the 66% who end up resitting. Then I'm going to highlight some free resources to you, things that you can use over the next week or so to give you the best chance of passing. And then there's a formal Q&A session at the end. I'm leaving around 20 minutes for Q&A, but it's kind of, that's a bit flexible. It sort of depends how many questions people are asking. And if we end up running slightly later than the planned finish time, because we've got lots of questions, that's absolutely fine. Can I just check that all the tech is working okay? Can you give me an emoji in the chat panel if you can see me okay, you can hear me okay, and everything's working? So if you find the chat panel and give me an emoji, please. Excellent. I've got some smiley faces. Thanks, Lee Ying-ong. Loving it. Lots of Simpsons thumbs. Everyone's a yellow thumb. Excellent. Thanks, Wai. Cool. Okay. All seen. Oh, Jim, loving it. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Let's get cracking with the content. So the exam requirements, and you know this already because you've already practiced some past exam papers, haven't you? So the exam is split into two halves. We've got the 50-mark case study question in section A, and then we've got these two 25-mark questions in the second half of the paper in section B. And the AAA exam is really predictable in terms of its structure and what they test in each part of the exam. Although the exam is predictable in terms of the structure of the questions, the content of the scenarios is always really different. This isn't an exam where you can rote learn previous answers. You have to respond to the specific scenarios. So in the case study, we always get one big question right at the start, normally on audit risk. So a balance is going to be misstated in the accounts, and you have to explain why it might be misstated. Is it because of inherent risk, something about the company's trade? Is it control risk? Something about the company's systems that don't prevent or detect errors? Or it could be detection risk, that the auditor misses the problem for some reason, and we end up with a misstatement in the financial statements. That's the normal one, audit risk. But sometimes, and this is, and I'm sure you know this already, there are three main variants of the AAA exam, and then a fourth one that is the spare exam. You're not all going to sit the same exam paper. Depending on what time of day you're sitting the exam, you'll get one of the three main variants. And if you have a technical problem on the day of the exam, because you're doing it remotely and there's some sort of issue, then you'll get to sit the exam a week later and you'll get the fourth variant, the other one. Now, across those four variants, normally three of them are audit risk, and one of them is this other question, which is business risk and risk of material misstatement. And this one's a bit more of a twist. Business risk, you have to explain why a problem in the scenario, a fact in the scenario, will impact the trading performance of the company. It'll impact the company's ability to meet its goals. That's business risk. And you'll normally get 10 to 12 marks on business risks. And then risk of material misstatement is then saying, take that same issue, but explain why it could be a problem for the financial statements. So it requires two different approaches. Business risk, explain why it's a problem for the company and its trade. Risk of material misstatement, why might that issue lead to a problem in the financial statements? So to give you an example, it could be that the company has an issue around credit control. Its customers aren't paying. Now, as a business risk, the problem there is we're lacking cash, and that lack of cash might mean that we don't have the money to pursue our goals, to invest in the business. That's the business risk. The risk of material misstatement would be that receivables are overstated because we're not going to get that cash coming in. So it's the same issue. Customers aren't paying, but we're explaining it in very different ways, depending on if it's a business risk or a risk of material misstatement. So for this exam, you have to be ready for audit risk or business risk and risk of material misstatement, which means you need to practice a range of past exam papers so that you're ready for any of those sorts of questions. Then in section A, we always get asked audit procedures, always. There will be something tricky, something unusual in the scenario, and you're going to be asked, how would you audit it? What audit evidence would you expect to obtain? Now, for the audit procedures question, we're going to be doing a practical exercise later in this session around how you generate audit procedures. But the key thing to remember is that your procedures have to be precise. They can't be general. They can't be pre-learned. You have to take a specific fact from the scenario and then suggest a source document that will explain how that source document will verify the fact from the scenario. And we're going to do an exercise on that later. Then in section A, we're always asked about ethics. There's always an ethics requirement. Normally, we get a little exhibit, an email or something that tells us something dodgy has been going on. And your job is to analyze, assess it, and normally suggest actions for the auditor to take. Now, it's important in the ethics scenario that you don't write pre-learned answers. If you spot a familiarity threat in the scenario, you can't just generally write about familiarity threats. It won't earn any marks. You have to explain why there is a familiarity threat in this particular scenario. So rote learning, absolutely not. You have to respond to the specifics in the scenario. Okay, that's section A, 50 marks. We also have the professional skills marks. Now, you'll be amazed how many students score 48% in this exam and 49%. It's absolutely heartbreaking, but so many people end up very close to passing, but not quite getting there. And if you don't earn these 4 easy marks in section A, you make it much more difficult for yourself to get up to 51 or 52. If you're someone who scores 48 or 49 and hasn't earned the professional skills marks, you would be really kicking yourself. So these 4 professional skills marks, they're for having a title with to, from, date. That's number 1, title. Number 2, we have a brief introduction. It can be 1 or 2 sentences, 1 or 2 lines. It does not have to be long, just a short introduction that tells us what the report is about. So that's the second one. The third one is for having subheadings all the way through your answer in section A. And then the fourth one, which is the hardest one to earn, is for the clarity of your language, professional language. That one is more challenging. But the first 3 are easy to earn. So you've got to get at least 3. And if you're writing clearly and precisely, you will get that 4th mark too. Then we move into section B. And in section B, there is always a reporting question, always. It won't be 25 marks purely on reporting. There'll be some other bits in it. But the main focus of one of the questions will be reporting. And it will either be criticize an audit report. So we're given an extract from an audit report and you have to say why it's wrong. The second type of question we get on reporting is we're given little scenarios and asked what would the impact on the audit opinion be or the audit report be as a result of these scenarios. And the third one, which is probably the hardest, is reporting to those charged with governance. So we're told about some issues and we have to say, what is it that we would report to the non-executive directors of the business as a result of these issues? Now, that was the hardest because it's a slightly more unusual requirement and often people's answers don't focus on the right sort of things. So if you do get one that is those charged with governance and reporting to them, you have to remember that these are, although they're at board level, because they're non-executive directors, they're not involved in the day-to-day running of the business. They don't necessarily know what's happening inside the company. So part of your role as the auditor is to report things to them that they would find interesting. So if an accounting policy has changed, you'd need to tell them because they might not know it. If management aren't following relevant accounting standards, IFRS, you'd need to report it to them because they might not know about it. If there is any kind of ethical situation happening that the auditors have put in place safeguards to protect against, we'd need to report it. So anything interesting in the scenario, we would report to those charged with governance and explain why we're doing so. Then the other section B question, it can come from anywhere in the syllabus. Common ones that we see are doing an other engagement. So there's been a fraud. Can you investigate it? There has been, we're buying another company and we want to do some due diligence on its forecasts. Can you suggest procedures to do that? Those are typical ones. But you might get a quality control question where you're given an extract for the audit file and your job is to critically evaluate the audit work that has been done. This third question is much less predictable about which topic area is going to be on. So key for you is going to be practicing over the next week or so as wide a range of questions as you can so that you are ready for whatever this twist requirement is in section B. Okay, common AAA issues and my advice on how to overcome them. So First thing that students often say to me, even at this stage of their revision, with just a week or so to go, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to sit exam questions. I need to do more learning. I need to do more reading of my textbook, memorizing my revision notes. That's what I need to do. I'm not ready for exam questions. And because this AAA exam is not really about knowledge, it's all about skills and application, you have to develop those skills by practicing exam questions. My advice is, from here until the exam, you shouldn't be doing any revision. Don't do any learning of notes. It should all be practicing past exam questions. And if there's a topic that you don't know about or an area you find difficult, then perhaps go back and read up on your notes. But from here, it should all be about question practice. In one of my recent podcasts, I interviewed a prize-winning student for AAA, and I was asking her about her study approach and her balance of learning versus practicing questions. And she spent about over her whole study period, right from the start of tuition until the exam, she spent a quarter of her time learning and 3/4 of her time practicing exam questions. And she went on to win a prize. Now, the learning bit should already have happened. You've already been through the course notes. You've already done your traditional study. This stage of your revision should be all question practice. That's how you maximize your chances of passing. Next thing that students say, they read the examiner's answer and find it overwhelming. How can I write this much? I need to write like the examiner to pass, obviously, but I can't write anywhere near this amount or anything this technical. I just can't do it. How can I pass? Because I can't write like the examiner. Well, you've got to be realistic. The examiner's answers are there as a reference tool, and the examiner has not written them under timed conditions. In fact, they have taken months to write them. I mentioned in the starting point here that I'm an examiner for another accounting body. The answers that I write that become the published model answers, I spend ages on them, and they go through all sorts of review processes. So I write them, and then they get reviewed by the senior moderating group at the exam board, and they add lots of things into them, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. They're definitely not anything like an answer that a student writes in the real exam. So my advice is just be realistic on yourself. What can you possibly hope to write in 3 hours and 15 minutes and finish the exam? It's nothing like the examiner's answers. You can write much shorter, much more practical answers. Now, I know with AAA, it's really hard for you to self-assess and say, an audit risk scores 3 marks per well-explained risk. But it's really hard for you to know whether your risk is good enough to score 3 marks. Have I written enough? So I would advise you strongly to reach out for feedback. If you're working with a decent tuition provider, they should be taking your work in for marking. I know on my program, I take in loads of my students' work for marking and give them detailed feedback on how to improve. It's really, really helpful. If you're not working with a tuition provider, a really good way around this is to study buddy with somebody. So, someone else who is sitting the paper, and I'm sure you have means of finding each other either through this session, or they might be someone that you're aware of through, I don't know, a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group, and swapping answers and giving each other comments on your answers is really helpful. Next thing, the exam kit's massive. And when you go onto the ACCA's website, there's past exam papers going back to 2018. It's absolutely loads of past exam questions. And some students go for the approach of, I need to work through all of them if I'm going to stand a good chance of passing this exam. And it's just unrealistic. The amount of, particularly now, you've got a week left before the exam. So you can't hope to do all of the past exam questions. And actually, I don't think it's helpful to try to do all of them. But very often where a student does that, they don't actually properly do the questions. They have a read of the question, then they read the model answer, and that's not a good approach. So my advice to you is to work smart. Okay, you need to do a range of questions. So a few on audit risk, but you don't need to do all 15 that are in the official exam kit. Pick a selection. But you want to do a few audit risk questions, a couple of business risk questions, some reporting questions, and a selection of questions covering other things. So don't feel like you need to do every question. You need to do a selection of them covering the full syllabus. And when you are doing those questions, at an absolute minimum, you need to be doing an answer plan. So going through the scenario, breaking it down, and creating your answer structure and your plan of what would go into your answer. If you haven't got time to then write up your answer fully, that's less of an issue. Because, maybe you're better to get through a few more questions by just doing answer plans rather than typing full answers out. But as a minimum, doing an answer plan for each question. This, I should have put this first. This is the most significant problem that students have. I think this is one of the main reasons that students don't get through AAA. Because they read the question and then they go, oh, that's hard. I'm not quite sure exactly how to do that question. That's difficult. This scenario is very involved. I know. I'll look at the answer. And then they read through the model answer and go, oh, I would have put that. I would have put that. I would have put that. Oh, yeah, that bit's okay. Excellent. I've done that question. Now I can move on to another one. And the problem there, the reason that's an issue is that this exam is about problem solving. It's not about rote learning previous answers because every scenario is different. An audit risk question comes up on most exam papers, but the risks that are in that scenario will be completely different to the risks in historic scenarios. So reading and learning previous answers doesn't help. You have to develop the skill of taking something from the scenario and analyzing it in the context of the question. And the only way to do that, the only way to develop that skill is for you to practice doing it. So please, from this last week of your revision, don't look at the answers before you do the questions because it's so damaging for your skill ability of problem solving. So my advice, you've got to see each of these questions as a challenge. It's a problem solving exercise. I need to work out how I can take information from the scenario and then analyze it in context of the question. And that's how you develop the skill of being able to approach a AAA question effectively. If you see this exam as I need to rote learn all of the previous answers, then when something similar comes up, I write what I've pre-learned, you will not pass this paper because the details in the scenario are very subtle and they will be different to the previous exam papers. And so the pre-learned answer will not score marks. You have to develop the skill of generating an answer from the scenario. Okay, some study skills then. So my first one is around time management. This exam is incredibly time pressured. The scenarios are really long and you've got lots of requirements to get through. There's so much to do and so little time. So how can we improve our time management skills? So it's really important that you are keeping an eye on the time throughout the question. So I'm using my calculator or whatever else, I'm assigning myself time for the overall question. So if it's a 25 marker, 25 times 1.8 minutes per mark, I've got 45 minutes to do the entire question. And I know that I've got my 45 minutes. And then within the question, if it's split into two halves, 8 marks, 7 marks, I'm thinking, right, well, I've got about 25 minutes for the first question, about 20 minutes for the second bit. I'm not really strict and fast on the sub parts. I'm thinking more, I need to manage my time, so I'm through this question in 45 minutes. Now, doing that and keeping an eye on the time as you are going through the question helps it to be in the front of your mind. What you really don't want to happen is you just start working through the question and then you glance at the time and it's let's say it's question 2, and all of a sudden you've already taken an hour to do question 2. You have to be looking at the time and keeping and monitoring it throughout. The first question. Now, what you this is some insights from my experience as an examiner, as a marker. Most students run out of time in the exam. Okay, most of them do. So if that is you, don't worry, you're in good company. But what you'll find on a student's answer is their first question that they do, if it's question 1, question 2, question 3, whichever one it is, whichever one they did first, their answers tend to be much longer. Okay, they write loads because there's lots of time. I've still got 2.5 hours left of the exam. I can write loads. And then they get to the second question, their answer becomes shorter. The third question, they often don't even answer it if they get there, or if they do answer it, they only do a tiny bit. Now, the problem of that is that the examiner always designs this paper that the hardest, most time-consuming parts come first, and then the easier, less challenging parts always come towards the end of the questions. The student with good exam technique and good time management gets to the easier bits at the end with plenty of time to answer them fully and earn those easy marks. The student with bad time management goes for ages on the difficult long bits and then doesn't have time to earn the easier marks later. So my advice to you, wherever you start this exam paper, is you have to attack the first part as if you are already running out of time. And my next tip for you is keep your answers really short. Okay, if, like me, you don't type very quickly, you know, I'm old, I haven't grown up in an era where I was using a keyboard at school or anything like that. So my typing skills aren't brilliant. And for a lot of students, they don't type very fast. That may well be you as well. You can, in this exam, you can pick up really high marks by writing very short answers. You do not have to write blocks and blocks of paragraph text. And I'm going to show you an appropriate length for an answer when we do a task in a minute. But less, you can write less and you can still score a passing mark. So really try to cut down what you write. Okay, I wanted to have a bit of a discussion here about what order do you do the questions in? So there are 3 questions in this exam, 1, 2, and 3. The 50 marker in part A, and then the 2 25 markers. So in the chat panel, where do you start this paper? Which order do you do the questions in? Do you start with number 1, or do you start with number 2 or 3? So in the chat panel, where do you start? Okay, I'm getting lots of answers in. Thank you for the participation. Joyce, I love your answer. That is a great answer. Can you go for section B? The overwhelming majority start with question 1. Nizam, you're a question 2er. Jinwei Wong is a 2 and 3, but most people are like Nawinda and Amira and Iman who start with question 1. Okay, now If you're going to score 70% in the exam, it does not matter which question you start with. Okay, if you're someone who's going to be a really high scoring student, you are going to pass anyway. It doesn't matter. But if you are someone who is more marginal, if you are someone who struggles with time management, you struggle to answer the full exam paper in 3 hours and 15 minutes, well, the question that is most time consuming, that has the biggest scenarios, the one that is easiest to get lost in, is question 1. For a lot of students, if you struggle with time management, doing question 1 first, which is the one that is hardest to manage your time, because there is so much to read and so much to do, question 1 is a trap. Okay, it's written as a trap. And if you're someone who struggles with time management, you are falling for that trap if you start with question 1. For most students, where time management is an issue, particularly if English isn't their first language, question 2 and question 3, the scenarios are much shorter. So it's easier to stick to your timings if you start with 2 and 3. We're disciplined in 2 and 3, and then I get through to question 1, and I use the balance of my time there. Rather than, because this happens to so many students, they start with question 1, the audit risk part for 25 marks, and they spend 2 hours of the exam on the audit risk question, trying to earn 25 marks. So they spend 2/3 of the exam trying to earn 1/4 of the marks. It's not an efficient use of your time. So I would I want to challenge you to think about it. And you might still decide to do question 1 first, but I want you to at least consider why it might be better to do question 2 and question 3 first of all. And it's worth telling you this, the examiner says do question 1 first. And the reason they say do question 1 first is because their data, their statistics tell them that students get the best mark in question 1, and they don't do as well in question 2 and question 3. My reading of that, and why I think that happens, is that 90% of students do question 1 first and spend most of their time in question 1. Obviously, they score a higher mark in question 1 because they spend so much time there. They score a dreadful mark in question 3, not because it was hard, but because they didn't have any time left to do it. So I think that the statistics from ACCA's data, I read it differently to the examiner. I know from my experience of working with students, they do better when they start in question 2 and 3 if time management is an issue. Okay, I'm going to a second question related to this. I'm going to go back a few slides here. So these are the 4 questions in section A, right? You've got audit risk, you've got audit procedures, you've got ethics, and you've got professional skills marks. Okay, let's number them 1, 2, 3, 4. Where do you start? Let's say you're running out of time. You've done question 2 and question 3 first, and you get to question 1 and you haven't got that much time. Which one of these are the easiest questions? Where can you pick up easiest marks in section A? Nawinda, absolutely. The audit procedures, you can write, they're so short to write. The procedures are really easy to earn marks on. And Joyce, you're exactly right. It's the ethics as well. Procedures and ethics are really time efficient places to score marks. So if you then get to question 1 and you go, I've only got 1 hour left to do question 1, go straight to the procedures, then go to the ethics, bag those easy marks, and then do the time consuming bit last. The more that you can see the AAA exam as, I just need to grab 50 easy marks and then have a go at the hard bits, the time consuming bits, and try and score some marks there, the better your chances are of passing. If you start with the really time consuming, difficult bit of audit risk, then if you're going to score 70%, it doesn't matter. If you're someone who's going to score 45 to 55, it makes a massive difference. You are much more likely to pass if you focus on the easier bits, the procedures and the ethics. Thank you everyone for the interaction, and glad that you're on the same page as me. Okay, so think about the order you do the questions in. For me, I do question 2, then I do question 3, and then I go into question 1 and I do the procedures and the ethics. And then the last thing that I do is the time-consuming audit risk question. And for me, that's a more efficient way of earning the marks. Okay, this bit's going to be more interactive. I'm going to be getting you to do a task in a second. So be ready with either your pen and paper or a word processor document, a Microsoft Word document set up. Okay, planning, really, really important in the AAA exam. Particularly in question 1, the scenario is massive, and you have to plan because you need to bring together information from different sources. You'll bring together some background information, the financial information from the financial data extract. Then you'll be given some business updates and some notes and an ethics scenario. You're going to have probably 5 different documents in question 1, and you've got to bring information from all of those documents to tell a coherent overall story. Planning is really, really important. So my tip for you with planning is to do it in CBE software. So when I go in, and if you've watched any of my debrief videos, there are quite a lot of them up on my YouTube channel. You'll be able to see me doing this. I always start, I have the requirements here, and then I have my answer set up on the page next to it. And as I'm reading through the scenario information, I'm populating my plan. I'm putting things into my plan as I read them. So I'm active as I'm reading through the scenario. And the beauty of planning in this way in the answer software, rather than handwriting or the scratch pad, the beauty of doing this is that if I run out of time and I don't have time to fully write up my answers, well, it will submit my plan. You know, my plan's not going to earn me full marks. It's not going to be as good as a full written answer, but it's going to score me at least some credit. What definitely won't score any marks is the handwritten plan that's on my notes here, because it's not getting handed in. But my plan that's in the answer software does get handed in, so it can pick up some marks. And it also helps you to be more efficient, because I then take my plan and I don't type it out in full again from scratch. I just add words into my plan to extend it out into a full written answer. Okay, and that's my second part of my planning. I take the planned points that I've generated, and then I extend them out into full written points. You'll notice the word I've used there though is short. All of my answers in AAA are really short. It's something that students, on every session I do like this, students always go, surely that's not enough. Surely I need to write more than that to pass. And you really don't. Your answers can be really short and focused, as long as they're full of the right sort of content. You don't need to turn them into long, fluffy, waffly answers. Okay, planning. We're going to have a go at doing some now. So on screen is a question. And you won't have seen this question before because it's one that I've written. So you can see the scenario on there. And what I want you to do, well, I just have a read of it first of all. So I'll just give you 30 seconds to read. This is a typical Section A audit procedures question. I should probably say in the exam, you can abbreviate. So things like HA, as long as the first time you write it, you put in brackets what it is. So I've defined that Hawthorne is HA, and then from here onwards, I use the term HA. EEG is the parent company. Okay, it's the parent company that is buying Hawthorne or HA. Okay, first question for you. How many audit procedures do we need in our answer plan? Excellent. Loads of people are typing 8. Spot on. In the AAA exam, it's generally 1 mark per well-explained point, isn't it? So for an 8-mark question, we're looking at 8 separate points, well explained. And for something to be well explained in a procedures question, it starts with a fact from the scenario. It then has a source document, something that will verify that fact, ideally a third-party document, and then an explanation of how that third-party document will verify the fact that we are looking to confirm. Okay. Oh, by the way, it's 1 mark per well-explained point everywhere, apart from audit risk, where it's 3 marks per well-explained risk, and business risks, where it is 2 marks per well-explained business risk. Everywhere else in the exam, it's 1 mark per well-explained point. Okay, if you've practiced some past exam questions, you'll know that what I've just said isn't correct. So what other area do we sometimes get 2 marks per well-explained point? Anyone who's practiced lots of past exam questions and looked at the marking guides will know the answer to this. Which other area is sometimes 2 marks per well-explained point? There's one other area. So I've said audit risk, business risk, those are 3 and 2, but there's one other area. Shanghai, you've got it. It's ethics. Yeah, it is ethics. Very occasionally, Amira, we see it in quality control, very occasionally. And here's some insight for you, right? They always start an ethics question with 1 mark per well-explained point. But if the question is being answered terribly by students, it's been done badly, then they up the marks to 2 marks per well-explained point. But we don't know in advance if it's going to be a 1 or a 2 mark per well-explained point question, because we don't know how well other students are going to do on it. So to be risk averse, you have to assume that ethics questions are 1 mark per well-explained point as well. I think it's useful telling you that. And the reason it's useful to tell you that is that on the hard questions, so if you think something looks really difficult in the exam, it's often marked really generously. So if you write anything sensible on a hard question, they will throw marks at you. Try to avoid leaving a blank page for a difficult question, because often the hard questions are the ones where it's actually easiest to score marks because they're marked so generously. Okay, now I'm going to get you to have a go at doing this question, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to generate my answer plan. First of all, I'm going to show you my first point, and then I'm going to leave you to have a go at this. So for a good audit risk, we start with a fact from the scenario. Sorry, for a good audit procedure, we start with a fact from the scenario that I'm trying to verify. So the first fact that I'm given here is this 60 million, right? So that's the first fact that I want to verify. So the 60 million, what can I verify that against? What source document could I use? In the chat panel, what can I use to verify or check that 60 million is correct? Perfect. Bank statements are ideal because they are third party. They're not an internal company document. So love it, bank statements, right? So my answer plan is the 60 million that's been paid. I'm going to use bank statements to verify it. And what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to check that that 60 million is accurate, accuracy of the figure. That's my answer plan for that audit procedure. I took a fact, I got a source document, and I explained why that source document is helpful. It will tell me that 60 million figure is accurate. Okay, so that's one. You've got one for free, and you need to come up with some more. So over to you to go through the rest of this scenario and pick out facts, source documents, and explain why they'd be useful. All I want from you at this stage is your plan. Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes or so to do this. When you're finished and you've done your answer plan, let me know in the chat panel. Give me a yes or something, or done. We've got first person is done. Nawinder, you win the prize for speediest. We'll give everyone else a couple more minutes just to get through. So Nawinder, you've earned yourself a minute break or so. Everyone else, please let me know when you're done. Take your time, no need to rush. I want you to have a proper go at this. Excellent, a couple more people are done. Fong Kashin is done as well. Please let me know when you're finished, but take your time. I want you to do this fully. Just your answer plan though. Okay, we've got quite a few more done now. So I think I'll just give you 30 seconds to finish off if you're still going this together, coming up with points for an answer plan out of this scenario. So if you're still finishing off, just finish that last point that you're doing. Thanks, Joyce. Thanks, Minnie. Thanks, ML, Simi, Jin. Okay, so let's talk together. So key skill with audit procedures is, as I was saying, you must start with specific things from the scenario. We are not looking to write generic points. So I read through the scenario, and 60 million we've already dealt with. The next thing was this 65% that we bought. We own 65% of the share capital. So I want to verify that fact. How can I verify that fact? Well, I'm going to look at the share documentation. And the reason I'm going to look at the share documentation is to confirm that I've got the rights and obligations to the share capital, that I actually own it, that they've got my name on them. And I'm going to recalculate the percentage of shares that I own based on the total share ownership, the total amount of share capital per company's house. Company's House is the UK, it's a UK specific government body where UK companies have to register their share capital. But you could, instead of Company's House, you could have any kind of depository or record of total share ownership. But if you put Company's House, the marker will know what you're talking about. The next fact that we're told is the 12th of December. So I want to confirm that it was the 12th of December that I actually bought these shares. And that will come from the sale and purchase agreement, the legal documentation around the sale. Now, if you don't know that term, sale and purchase agreement, whenever a company is bought by someone else, that you have this kind of legal document called the sale and purchase agreement. But if you just put legal documentation, that would be fine. And I want to check that the date is accurate. The next fact I'm told is this 75 million of net assets. So the 75 million net assets that I've acquired, how do I know that there were 75 million? Well, whenever we buy a company, you have to get a due diligence report. It's part of the transaction documentation. You have to have it done. An independent assurance provider will go through the financials of the business that you're acquiring. And so we can verify that there were 75 million net assets acquired based on this independent financial due diligence report to confirm that fair value of 75 million. Now, the next fact is the 35 million of non-controlling interest. So for that, I don't just want to say go to the financial due diligence report. I want to do something different. So I know that a non-controlling interest, well, that's the 35%, isn't it? That's the 65% that I don't own. So I'm going to recalculate that 35 million, because it looks like, based on the figures that I'm given, 75 million that I acquired and the 35% that I don't own, it looks like it should be 26.25 million rather than 35 million. So it appears to be overstated. Now I'm starting to drift there into an audit risk that it appears overstated. But what I wanted to show you this, because doing that little calculation adds real value. Rather than just saying recalculate it, if you're given the information to do the recalculation, they'll give you credit for that. Normally, a little calc like that is an extra bonus half mark. So it's a really good idea to do the calculation if the data is provided to you. Now, we're now through most of the information we're given, but we're told this bit of narrative. EEG have struggled to integrate HA into the business. Now that, why are they telling me that? Actually, you tell me in the chat panel, why have we been told that bit of information? We've struggled to integrate HA into the business. Why are we being told that? Every bit of information we're given is there for a reason. Why are we told that? It could be that it's the first time they've done an acquisition, but we don't know that, Farzana. It's a good idea, but we don't know for sure. We don't want to speculate. Okay, Joseph, boom, that's exactly it. Jean, perfect. There could be an impairment of the goodwill. That is the hint to you to go, oh, goodwill and potential impairment. So my goodwill, I'm going to recalculate any goodwill on acquisition. I'm not told what the goodwill is, but there must be some because I paid 60 million for something where I'm acquiring 65% of 75 million. So I could recalculate it. I could actually do this same calculation, 75 million. Times 65% and compare it to the 60 million. But anyway, I don't want to repeat myself because I've already done that for the non-controlling interest. So my goodwill, I'm going to test it for impairment because it looks like it should be written down because there are indicators of goodwill impairment. So how many have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 6 so far. Then I'm through all of the information, right? So now my approach is, have I got any standard tests, any standard things that I can suggest that will work in pretty much any audit procedures question? Has anyone got any ideas? What kind of general? Okay, lovely. Fong Iman, board minutes. Okay, Shangari. Board minutes we're going to run with in a second. Shangari has said about obtaining written representation. Now, we only score for that if we're confirming something's judgmental that only management know about. So here, I don't know what that is. I'm not quite sure what I'd get written representation over. You only score for that if you go on and say written representation over this. That is something that only management know. Okay, Theodore, the disclosure point is a real last resort. Okay, very rarely scores for this sort of question. Although it's correct, we would check it's been fully disclosed in the accounts. It's not really an audit procedure around the acquisition. It's about presentation in the financial statements. So I would avoid disclosure unless I haven't got any other ideas. Okay, so what I'd go with, and this is important, if you are going for board minutes, which it scores in most procedures questions, you have to say exactly what it is you'll get from those board minutes. So here, it's that I would say it's that the acquisition has been approved by the board. Okay. Now, I've got 7. I needed 8, but I've only got 7, and I can't think of another good one. So what students with good exam technique do is they go, oh, well, I've only got 7. That's fine. That's more than enough to pass the question. What other students do is write an 8th or a 9th or a 10th one that aren't very good. And there are other things you could definitely write here and score marks, right? But what you don't want is just, oh, I need an 8th one. I'm going to waste time by writing one that's not very good on the hope that it might score. Okay, so be confident in yourself, right? there is enough in here to pass this question comfortably, and then we can move on to picking up marks elsewhere in the paper. We don't have to get full marks in every question to be able to pass this exam comfortably. Okay, thank you for all the participation. So that's generating an answer plan. Now you can tell what's coming next, can't you? We're going to take this answer plan and we're going to turn it into a full written answer. And again, this is going to be you writing this up fully. So I'm going to show you the level of detail that I would put for that first answer. So that was my answer plan. 60 million paid. It's the bank statements I'm going to use, and it's going to help me with the accuracy of that figure. So this is exactly what I would write in the exam and no more. Okay, so I'd agree the accuracy of the 60 million paid figure to bank statements. Full stop. Now, you'll see some students write that point in double the number of words. Obtain the bank statements for the company and ensure that the 60 million paid figure for the business agrees back to the bank statements on the 12th of December. And they write double the amount that they need to just score the marks. Here, the important points are, it's a fact, I've got a source document, and I'm saying why I'm doing it, the accuracy. And that is all you need to score 1 mark for that audit procedure. Okay, I've done the first one with you. You've got another 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to write up. So take your time, but I want you to try to write them as briefly as you can. Back over to you. Just like with the doing the plan, once you're finished, if you can let me know in the chat panel, just type done, then I'll know that we can go through the answer. But take your time, I want you to do this fully. Great, we've got a few dones already. I'll just give everyone else another minute or so. Minnie, that's a good question. Must answers be in the sequence of verb, explanation, fact, and source document? It doesn't matter what those things are in, as long as you've got all of them. Okay, so those are the things that you need for a good audit procedure. What you're doing and why. Jinri Wong has asked, must answers include assertions? If relevant, yes. But they're not always, there's not always an assertion that is relevant. So if you can think of one that is relevant, then it's good to include it. Okay, but don't feel like you have to do it for all of them. Great questions, thank you. Just while people are finishing off, I had a few people suggest about IFRS 10, consolidation type points that you could have put in here, confirming that the only the post-acquisition profits have been consolidated. That would be a very relevant point. Yeah, I didn't put it because it's quite technical, and I try to avoid technical points in AAA. The ones I love for audit procedures are ones like that first one, because they're so simple to explain. I try to avoid ones that are more technical because they take me too long to explain. It's not an efficient way to earn marks. Okay, let's run through then, and you can compare your answer against mine. So the second one, the 65% ownership, that we're going to get share certificates to make sure we own those shares, and we'll recalculate the total percentage ownership based on companies' house filings. So confirm the 65% ownership of the shares, rights and obligations by obtaining share certificates. Recalculate the 65 ownership, agreeing the total share capital to companies' house filings. You'll notice a technique that I use a lot there. And that technique is putting something in brackets. If I haven't got time to explain it fully, or I don't want to explain it fully, but I just want to show the marker that I've thought about it, I just put it in brackets. Yeah, and that is a way of being efficient, earning credit without having to write loads. Okay. My third one was the date of the 12th of December. We were going to get the sale and purchase agreement to confirm the accuracy of that date. So I've put the assertion here because there is one that I think is directly relevant, the accuracy. I've quoted the specific fact of 12th of December, and I've got a source document, the sale and purchase agreement. So my first one and my third one, love it because they are nice, short procedures. The next one, which was the 75 million of net assets acquired. So I'm going to obtain the financial due diligence report and confirm that the reported 75 million fair value agrees to the report. I could have put accuracy on that as well. Maybe I should have done, but that's good enough. And you'll notice every time there's a fact, there's a source document, and I'm explaining why this test is helpful. If you think about audit procedures as being what you're doing and why you are doing it, it's a really helpful mindset. The next one, which is all about the non-controlling interest. So I'll just give you a chance to read that. Okay, I could have. What other thing could I have added onto this one to make it even better? In the chat panel, what could I have added to this to make it even better? There's something I could add on to this around this discussion with management to make this an even better audit procedure. In the chat panel, what am I talking about? Yes, neural, perfect. If I'm going to discuss something with management, wouldn't it be better to confirm it in writing as well? Yeah. So I could have added on to this and obtain written representation, and it would have made it even better. Neural, great work. Yep. Anytime you're discussing something with management and relying on what they tell you, then I'm going to, it's a good idea to confirm it in writing so there's no misunderstanding. It's a better source of audit evidence, isn't it? Excellent, thanks, Neural. The next one, the goodwill point. So I'm going to recalculate it, test it for impairment because they've struggled to integrate HA. So it looks like there are indicators of impairment. Okay, so I did do the little calculation here. My reason being that I've only got 7 points. And so I wanted to make the ones that as mark scoring as possible. And I know that these little calculations, the examiner gives me half a mark for each of them. Bonus half marks. Okay, and then the last one. I'm going to review the board minutes to ensure that the acquisition was approved. Short and sweet. Okay, so 2 things I hope are obvious to you anyway, but I just want to point them out. Each of these points is very precise. It's full of content, but it's short. And that's the style that I would encourage you to go for. Full of content, but short. And then after each point, look at what I have left after each point. Okay. I'm leaving a gap after each point. Why am I doing that? What's the function of these gaps? What's the purpose of these gaps? Why am I doing that? Yeah, Minnie, you've nailed it. Yeah, this is so easier to mark when each of the points is separated out. So the marker can just go down it and go, yep, 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 rather than having to sift through a dense block of text. I can tell you this from my experience as a marker. When someone presents an answer like this, you love the student. Irrationally, you love them. They've made your life easier. They've thought about you as the marker. And you think, what a kind student. I really like this student. So when they explain themselves not quite perfectly, I really like this student. Is it half a mark or a full mark? Well, I really like this student because they've thought about me as the marker. I'm more likely to go, oh yeah, benefit of the doubt. That's just about okay to get a full mark. I mean, they're not going to give you marks for absolute rubbish just because you've presented it well. But if you do present it in this style, the marker will be on your side and will therefore be more likely to award you credit. So follow that approach all the way through the exam. Every point, every audit risk should be separated out. Every ethics point separate after each one. So it makes it easier for the marker. Okay, thank you for all the participation. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. And I hope you found that useful and helpful doing that together. Okay, on to my final skill for you for AAA, which is adding depth to your points. Very often students don't add quite enough onto it, something they're analysing in AAA for it to score the full mark that's available, or the full 3 marks available for an audit risk, or 2 marks for a business risk. So how can I add depth to my points to add weight to them so that they're more likely to score fully? And here are 3 things that I do. My first one is that I squeeze as much as I can out of the scenario. I try and bring facts together to try to add depth to my points. So for example, in the first question, I might be told that the company is listed, right? And so there is external pressure on reporting decent results. Now, in the scenario, as I'm doing my audit risks, I might see that they're overstating revenue. They might be overstating revenue for something that's cut off, for example. They're recognizing revenue too early. And what I do to add depth to that point is I bring in the fact that they are listed and use it to add context. So because they're listed, that might be why they're trying to overstate results, because there's external market pressure. So I'm trying to use wider facts from the scenario that I have squeezed from the scenario to add extra depth. The next thing I'm trying to do is ask the so what question. What's the full impact of this? How does it affect the short term and the long term? How does it affect other parts of the financial statements? How does it affect our ability to trade into the future? I'm trying to consider the full impact of the point that I'm making. And that helps me sometimes to add an extra point onto it. And my third great technique for you, and this works in so many different exams, not just AAA, is that you consider how this issue impacts other parties. So customers, suppliers, shareholders, employees, management, government, pressure groups, whatever. But I'm thinking about how does it impact not just the here and now, but how does it have wider impact and wider context? And a really effective technique for me for adding depth to my point is to talk about how it impacts another party, another group. That also, thinking about other people, helps me to generate more ideas. So in an audit procedures question, I'm thinking about other parties. Oh, it could be the lawyers who are involved here. It could be the whoever has brought the case against us. It could be the management team. but I'm thinking about those different groups and considering a procedure that might be relevant using that group. So wider stakeholders is a really effective way of coming up with more points. Okay, that's the study skills part. My top tips for you for passing AAA then. So this is perhaps the bit you've been waiting for. What would I be doing between now and the exam to maximize my chances of passing? So my first would be doing the latest exams on the practice platform. So you've got a week. There is enough time for you to do the 3 latest exams. If you've got, and doing them to time 3 hours and 15 minutes. So you've got September, December 21, you've got March, June 21, and you've got September, December 20 as well, are all on the practice platform. I think that, and there are others, so you can go practice exam 1, 2, and 3 as well. But these 3 latest exams are the ones that are in the examiner's current style, because they have been changing their style in recent years. So doing those to time. And I'll share a stat with you. If you're linked up with me on LinkedIn, you probably already know this stat because I talk about it a lot. ACCA's research from 2021, their data shows that if a student has done a full timed mock on the practice platform, their chances of passing are 12% higher. The pass rate is 12% higher amongst students who do a mock exam on the practice platform compared to students who don't. And the reason for that is that you are practicing the skill of dealing with a full exam paper. It's the best possible practice you can do. And the joy of these 3 recent exams is there are examiners' reports for them. And the examiner's reports are amazing. Right? They are full of detailed information on each question about what the examiner was trying to achieve with it, what good students did well, and what weaker students missed out on. So having done the exam paper yourself, using the examiner's report to debrief it is really helpful. I'm actually going to show you something out of the examiner's report in a minute. That hopefully will be helpful for you. This is the thing to avoid doing, okay? Don't memorize past exam answers and then try to regurgitate them in the exam. If anything is pre-prepared, it's very, very unlikely to score in AAA. The examiner says this in every set of examiner's comments. It was obvious where students just wrote pre-learned things because the points weren't really relevant and they didn't score many marks for it. So if you're tempted to go down the rote learning route, because maybe it worked for you in some of the lower level exams, it won't work for AAA. So do not memorize past papers. The value of doing the past papers is to develop your skills of coming up with ideas. This is in the exam. Everything you write, absolutely everything you write in AAA should be responding to a specific fact in the scenario. Okay, anything that is bland and generic doesn't tend to score. It has to be based on something from the scenario. So see your job in the exam as finding the relevant facts in the scenario and then analyzing them to add weight to them, making them relevant. There are loads of these, absolutely loads of easy marks, at least 70 easy marks in the exam, and there are at least 30 more difficult ones. You can pass this paper by picking the low-hanging fruit. So doing things like in question 1, when I'm running short of time, doing the audit procedures and the ethics part first, because those are easier marks. Anytime it asks you in a question 2 or a question 3 about audit evidence, so what evidence would you expect to see on the file? Those are really easy marks. So making sure that you're picking up the more straightforward parts of the questions and focusing on those, you can easily accumulate enough marks to pass. Okay, see this exam paper as a challenge of going and finding 60 easy marks and then having a go at the rest of it, but not overly focusing on the difficult bits, instead trying to earn the easier bits. And that's a really effective way of getting through this exam paper. Oh, and some of the easiest marks in the exam, in question 1, the audit risk question, there's generally 3 or 4 marks available for calculating and commenting on materiality of the audit risk. If there's any question where it's giving you short scenarios and asking you to comment on the correct accounting treatment, or in a reporting question, there will be marks available for calculating and commenting on materiality. Normally, across the whole exam, there are 6 or 7 marks available for commenting on the materiality of something. The hint that there are going to be marks available for it will be that somewhere in the scenario, it gives you PBT, it gives you revenue, it gives you total assets. Might not give you all 3, might just give you 2 of those. But if they're giving you those numbers somewhere in the scenario, that's the examiner's examiner speak for, I'm going to give you some marks for materiality. If you use these numbers to calculate the materiality of the issues in the question, I'm going to give you some marks for it. Okay, so make sure you're doing that throughout the whole exam paper, not just in question 1. Actually, I said I was going to do something with the examiner's report. The screen is just going to change slightly so I can show you the examiner's report. So this is the one from September, December 21, the most recent exam paper. And I'm not going to go through the detailed questions because I want you to use this after you've done this most recent exam paper. But in this general comments section on page 3, there are some really useful points I'm going to share with you. You'll notice that there's then loads, look, there's like, what, 15 pages of chat from the examiner about the 3 questions. It's full of really useful stuff. So you should be going through this once you've done September, December 21. But the general comments I wanted to share with you together, because they always say the same things. So marks at AAA are for application of knowledge to a given scenario, not for demonstrating knowledge, but for applying it to the scenario. Look, a common feature of weaker answers in this subject is the use of rote-learned knowledge without application to a specific scenario. It's exactly what I've been saying all the way through this presentation. You can't write general points that have been rote-learned. You have to tailor your points to the scenario. Look, simply listing knowledge without explaining its relevance or purpose will not be sufficient to pass the exam. If you feel like you are brain dumping something pre-learned, stop, because it will not pass. And there's a really useful point given here around ethics. This is something that students often do. So correctly identifying the threat does not score marks. Even if it is a familiarity threat, and you say it's a familiarity threat, you don't get any marks. You only get marks if you explain why there is a familiarity threat in this particular scenario. So implication in that specific case is required for you to score credit. Pre-learned doesn't work. You must respond to the specific details in the scenario. Okay, now that's general points out of this examiner's report. There's loads more specific information that I'd want you to read through, but only after you've done this specific exam paper. So back into my presentation. I just wanted to highlight a few that could be helpful for you in this final stage of your exam preparation. I referred to this right at the start of the presentation, my podcast. It's had something like 10,500 listens now. So a lot of students use this resource, and I get loads of comments from students about how useful they find it. It's focused on AAA. It includes some recaps of technical topics and a lot of application to real-world events. And as the examiner's comments told us there, a key skill in AAA is applying your knowledge to scenarios, and the podcast is designed to help you to do that. So it's well worth having a listen. On my YouTube channel, which you can find by looking for ACCA Ben Wilson AAA, I make quite a few resources available for free. So within my course, if you're one of my paid students, I've got a whole suite of exam preparation resources within there. And I make some of them for free, available for free on YouTube, so you can get a taster of what my course is like. But they're really useful. So there's loads of stuff on there about how to deal with an audit risk question, for example. So it's worth having a look and using some of the resources. If you subscribe to it, you'll get updated when I release more stuff next week. I also post useful content on LinkedIn. So exam tips. I also post auditing questions and get lots of people to comment on them to kind of raise wider awareness. They're exam-based scenarios, but you get to see lots of people in the profession giving their thoughts on a particular ethical scenario, for example. So sign up, link up to me on LinkedIn, and you'll get access to that content. Okay, thanks everybody for your attention during the presentation part of today's session. We've had some questions as we've been through, but not very many. So if you've got any questions about AAA or studying generally, we've got 10 or 15 minutes now at the end to take those questions. So please feel free to ask me anything you like. Chat panel is probably easiest for me to manage, but if you have anything you want to know about AAA or studying generally, please post your question in the chat panel. Okay, Nawinda has asked, how do you differentiate our wording for audit evidence and audit procedures? Right? And another one actually, Nawinda, on that, they sometimes ask, what information would you expect to see on the file? Okay, there's a huge amount of overlap between those questions. So an audit evidence question is focused more on what is the source document. So the bank statement is the source of evidence. But you still need to explain why it's helpful, why it's useful as audit evidence, because it's going to confirm the accuracy of the 60 million. The audit procedure, how it's subtly different, is more around the action for the auditor, what you're doing. But if it's a Venn diagram, the overlap between an audit evidence and an audit procedures question is like that. They are incredibly similar. And if you answer them as an audit procedures question, both of them, you'll still score the marks. So it's a slightly different emphasis in the window, but not very different. Okay, thanks for that question. Nizam, how many percentage is to verify it's material or not material? So the approach in AAA is always take the issue, let's say 1 million, and divide it by the relevant benchmark. Let's say it's PBT, because this is an issue that impacts profit. Let's say profit is 5 million. So 1 million divided by 5 million would be 20%. I can do the math. And I would then say that's material, because the benchmark for PBT is 5 to 10% of profit before tax is considered to be material, somewhere in that range. If it comes out at like 4 to 6%, I would say it's borderline material. But if it comes out at 80% of PBT, I would say it's very material. Yeah, so my benchmark for materiality for PBT is 5 to 10%. For assets and for revenue, just keep it simple. 1% is fine for both of those. So if you've got in your mind 1% and 5%, those are enough. 1% for revenue and assets, and 5% for profits. Thanks for the question, Nizam. ML has asked, for section A, by answering ethics and procedures questions first, we don't lose professional marks. ML, the joy of a word processor, the joy of typing your answer is that even if you answer part C and part D first, you can just add part A and part B up here. So even though you're answering these first, you just put them at the bottom of your answer that gets handed in. Joyous, isn't it? Yeah, so I take that point, ML, I do, because if you put it in the wrong order, you won't get the professional marks. Because you're using a word processor, it's so easy to just add things in up above. It's not like this is a handwritten exam anymore. Okay. Minnie has asked, is it possible the unreleased variant of December will be recycled? Minnie, I don't know the answer to that. Although, ask yourself this question, right? I'm going to give you two conflicting thoughts. One is that they don't release all these questions. Yeah, why are they not releasing all of these questions if they're not going to recycle them in the future? Okay, that's one thought. The other thought is that after the exam, if you go on something like Open Tuition or other like Facebook groups or whatever, people always talk about what came up in their exam paper. And so even though ACCA don't release these questions, students talk about them. And ACCA are very risk averse. What they do not want is you to be answering, to get an exam question that you're already aware of the content of it. So I would say probably not, Minnie, but we don't know. Okay, in the chat panel, Shangari has asked about tips on quality control questions. Okay, so in a quality control question, what you're generally given is, here's some stuff we've done, right? So this is how we've audited this particular area. And my approach, my mindset in that sort of question, Shangari, is that everything they've done is rubbish. That's my starting point. Everything is wrong. And my job is to explain why it's wrong. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. And it's the same approach actually in an audit reporting question when you're critically evaluating an extract from the audit report. The mindset is that everything's wrong. All of the titles are wrong. All the content of the paragraphs is wrong. All the extra paragraphs like emphasis of matter are going to be incorrect. The audit opinion is going to be incorrect. Everything's wrong. And my job is to explain why it's wrong. So that's my tip with that, Shangari. Joyce, if we run out of time for question 1, should we leave our answer plan in the word processor? It will cost us professional marks if we do so. Joyce, is a really good comment. Yeah, it will cost you. It will. It's a balancing act though, right? So what will it cost you? It will cost you the clarity mark. You will lose 1 professional skills mark. But you might gain 2 or 3 content marks for what's in that plan. So it's a judgment call for you, Joyce. If you look at what's in that plan and go, do you know what? I reckon there's 2 or 3 marks for the content there. It's worth sacrificing the clarity professional skills mark so that I can earn the 2 or 3 technical marks, content marks that are going to be in there. Or if you look at your plan and go, oh God, that is rubbish. That's not going to score anything. It's delete it because it's better to earn the professional skills mark. So it's a judgment call for you, Joyce. Jinri Wong has asked, will we get credit by including real world examples? Probably not. Probably not. I mean, the exam is designed to be comprehensive, right? The scenario is designed to have enough information in the scenario for you to fully answer the question. So they're not expecting you to refer to, I don't know, inflation is on the rise in many countries at the minute. Interest rates are rising across most of the world. You're not supposed to be commenting on, okay, so that's going to impact the discount rates that we'd use in a time value of money type calculation, which we might have to use when valuing share options, for example, or doing an impairment review. What they would expect you to say is that the discount rate is subjective and might not be correct, rather than it might not be correct because I know that in the real world, interest rates are rising and that would impact the discount rate. So, Jim, we wrong. I would only refer to real world events if it's going to be like 2 or 3 words. What I'm not doing is writing like a load of stuff about COVID or, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I mean, that only write them as a tiny supporting point if writing them at all, because there's not any specific credit for them. Nizam, what are my expected current issues questions? Data analytics. Okay, so in the most recent session I had with the examiner, they talked about data analytics loads. That would be my tip for you. Okay, that's right at the forefront of their mind. Jihwe has asked for audit risk questions, as an example, there are 12 marks and each carries 3 marks. So I need 4 well-explained risks. Okay, what you've suggested doing there, Gia, is should I write more? Should I write 6, 7, 8 risks? And my answer is definitely do not do that. Okay, what you're suggesting there is a recipe for running out of time. Okay, if you go for loads of audit risks, because there will be 10 or 12 in the scenario, at least. There's always loads. And if you try and go, oh, I'll write a few more because I want to really make sure that I get all of the marks for audit risk, what happens to a student in that situation is they run out of time to get through the rest of the exam paper. So I would not do that at all, Gia. What I would do though, Gia, for yours, is I would be doing a materiality calculation for each of my risks, because that's a bonus mark on top of the 3 marks that I get for explaining the risk. So for your 4 well-explained risks, Gia, I've got a materiality calculation for each of those. I've got 3 or 4 marks for those already. For Kira, is it possible if the materiality level to be more than 100%? If I understand that question correctly, for Kira, we're saying, like, could the issue be so material it's more than 100% of profit? So the business is making £1 million of profit before tax, and this issue is 10 million. It's 10 times profit. Yes, then it can be more than 100% of profit. Absolutely, it can be. And if it is, and it would turn profit into a loss, then it's very likely to be a pervasive issue. Not just material and pervasive. Jane, can I see the full answer again, please? Yeah, I'll get that back on screen whilst I'm answering other questions. Evelyn has asked, so shall we write out the name and definition of the specific auditing standards before we answer the scenario? No, absolutely not. Please, please, please never write the name of an auditing standard, its number, the name of an accounting standard, its number. You don't get any marks for them and it costs you loads of time. And I'm sure what you're thinking, Evelyn, is, hold on, the examiner always does that in their answers. And they do that because their answers are a reference tool for students to, I don't know, future students to go back and learn about auditing. You don't get any marks for doing it, but it costs you time. Therefore, it is a complete waste of your time to do it. So definitely don't. Thank you for asking that question. That's a very valuable lesson for everybody else here. Don't write out the names and numbers of accounting standards or auditing standards. Jinwei Wong has asked, how many percentage to consider pervasive? Okay, so for something to be pervasive, it's judgmental, right? That's the answer. It's judgmental. It's the auditor's judgment. But the things they'll take into account are, is this isolated to one area? Is it just receivables? Or is it an issue that impacts many different parts of the financial statements? We've had accounting records have been destroyed in a fire for the accounting records for the entire financial statements. So that's one thing. Is it isolated or is it widespread? And then the second thing they look at is it so big that it causes a dramatic change in the presentation of the accounts? So does it turn profit into a loss? Does it mean that we breach a covenant on a loan? So we need to maintain interest cover of 3 times. And because of this issue, our interest cover is only 2 times. And therefore we've breached a loan covenant. That would probably make it pervasive. So Jimmy Wong, it's not a fixed percentage. It's judgmental for the auditor. They look at how widespread the issue is. Does it turn profit into a loss? Does it mean that we breach a loan covenant? Those are the things that would suggest it's pervasive. Okay, I've got Fakira, I've answered your question. Iman has asked, how do I differentiate about when to use earnings management, management bias, and window dressing? Is it interchangeable and do they have the same meaning? Yeah, pretty much they do. Yeah, those are all ways of saying that management are using their judgment to overstate profits or whatever the balance is. So yeah, Iman, those all mean the same thing. So management, for me, management bias is probably the one that I would use. I say management bias, and then I explain why I think they're biased. They're doing this by recognizing revenue too early to try to hit some sort of revenue target that triggers a bonus. Okay, Minnie has asked, would this written answer presented of 7 points award us 7 marks or 8? Okay, the answer is you don't know, because the marker might not agree that all of my points are particularly relevant. But the things I've done on here that would probably get me extra credit is I've done a couple of little calculations. General rule in the whole of the AAA exam is a relevant value-added calculation scores an extra half mark. And you could say that those would score me an extra half. So this first point here, agree the accuracy paid to the bank statements. That's a home banker for 1 mark, right? My second one here, I've actually got 2 procedures in there, really, haven't I? So I'm saying that I own the shares and I'm doing a recalculation about the share ownership percentage. So you could argue that there's actually 2 points there. And similarly with this recalculation one here, you could argue there are 2 points in there. So I would say this probably would score 8 marks, but you never quite know. Okay, Iman, I've answered your question. Joseph, I've answered your question. We've got about a minute or so left, so I'll answer the remaining questions and then we'll probably draw a close to the session. So Stephen Y has asked, may I get a full answer on expected current issue questions? So yes, for current issues, the one that I would tip you most on is data analytics. Okay, that's the thing that is at the front of the examiner's mind. The last session I had with the examiner, they spoke about it loads. Okay, so then every now and again, the examiner does a conference session with senior tutors, and the last one, which was the AAA examiner talked about data analytics a lot. So I took that as a sign it's in their mind. So that would be the one that I would be all over. Question 1, so Joseph has asked, question 1, the subheading in briefing notes, do you recommend coming out with short subheadings based on the questions or just copy and paste the whole question from the exhibit? Will it, okay, so Joseph, I would have like just the question copied and pasted for part A and B and C, right, and D, whatever, just the question copied and pasted. But my subheadings are on top of that. So in my audit risks, I've got a subheading for each risk. Yeah, so that it adds more structure. So it's not just A, B, C, D, it's a subheading for each risk. So the first one might be revenue recognition, subtitle, and then we explaining it. Tips on a reporting question, Nizam. I mean, so you've got 3 different types: criticizing an existing audit report, saying what the audit opinion should be in a particular scenario, and reporting to those charged with governance. My tip for you is to practice a range of all of those questions. In the criticizing an audit report question, you have to assume everything's wrong. Every single detail is incorrect, including the opinion, the titles, the basis for opinion. Everything's going to be wrong. Your job is to find and explain why. The second type of question, which is what should the audit opinion be? Make sure that you're talking about the size of the issue. Is it material? Is it material and pervasive? The type of issue, is it a disagreement or is it a lack of evidence? And then being clear about what the audit opinion should be. Neural, if the amount is immaterial, does it still pose risk? Yes, it can do, because there could be several immaterial issues that when you add them together, combine to being material. Or it might be that we've only tested a sample. We've only tested a few items, and we've found an issue that's immaterial. In our population here, there's a little problem. So then when I test the whole population, I might find much bigger issues. So it's probably not an issue in its own right. It's what that small issue tells you. So it might be that if you only test 10% of the invoices and you find a problem, well, in the 90% that you haven't tested, there's probably more problems. So you need to do increased sample sizes. Okay, that's all the questions in the Q&A. In the chat, for question 1, Lim has asked, are conclusions necessary? No, there's no mark for a conclusion in question 1. The examiner has said that they like it though. So if you're sat at the end of the exam, relaxing because I've got a spare minute or so and I'm not quite sure what to do with myself in my spare minute, I'll do a conclusion. Yep, that's the only time I do it though, if I've got a little bit of spare time, which is very unlikely in AAA. Okay, I think that I've answered everyone's questions. Oh, sorry. No, that's not what I was trying to do. My smooth end has not been so smooth because my screen went. Hold on, I just had a thank you. Actually, is it even worth doing this? I had a thank you screen. It's going so well, wasn't it? Fell at the final hurdle. Okay, thank you everybody for your participation. I hope you found today's session useful. Hook up with LinkedIn, use my free resources of the podcast and the YouTube, and you'll get lots of extra support over this next week. Good luck for the exam. All the best of luck to all of you. Remember, if you remember one thing out of this scenario, let it be no rote learning. You must respond to the specific scenarios. Thanks, everyone. You're very, very welcome.